Ever since my daughter's first birthday, my husband started sneaking out at 2 a.m. every night to sort through our trash with latex gloves and a flashlight between his teeth. I watched him carefully select specific items from our bins and bury them in metal boxes in our backyard, creating dead patches of grass that smelled like decomposition. When I finally followed him, one night I discovered he was collecting our baby's dirty diapers, holding them up to his face and taking deep long breaths with his eyes closed like he used to look when we were intimate. Ever since my daughter's first birthday, my husband started sneaking out of bed at 2 a.m. every single night. I'd hear him go between the backyard and basement, routinely returning at 4:30 a.m., smelling like outside, like garbage and something else I couldn't place my finger on. When I'd casually ask how he slept, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Like a baby, honey," but his eyes would dart away. Guilty. My sister thought I was losing it. Maybe he's just stressed about being a new dad. Men process things differently. I started watching him through our bedroom window. He'd check our neighbors' windows first, making sure no one was watching, before creeping to our trash bins. He'd go straight to our trash and start sorting through it with the focus of a surgeon. He'd put on latex gloves, surgical ones that snapped in the quiet night. Through the window, I watched him carefully sorting through our bins with a small flashlight clenched between his teeth, selecting specific items, examining them like evidence at a crime scene. When he found what he wanted, his whole body would change, shoulders relaxing, breath coming faster. He'd place these packages carefully into Ziploc bags, labeling each one with dates and numbers. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. He'd walk to the back corner of our yard with a small shovel. I watched him dig up a metal box he'd buried there, place the new packages inside, and bury it again every night, adding to his underground collection. Once I cracked the window and heard him whisper as he dug, "This one's perfect, still fresh." His voice was thick with something that made my skin crawl. The next morning, I pointed to the exact spot where I'd watched him dig. The grass was dead in a perfect rectangle, and the smell coming from that patch made me gag, sweet and rotten, like something decomposing. What happened there, and why does it smell so bad? His face went white. "Raccoons," he said quickly. "They're burying dead animals. I have to dig them out before it attracts more pests." But raccoons don't bury things in perfect rectangles, and they don't come back to the same spot every night. "Maybe we should call animal control," I suggested. He grabbed my arm. "Number, I'll handle it. The smell is just decomposition natural. I'll put lime down." He bought $300 worth of pest control that day, desperate to explain the freshly disturbed earth. Spread enough lime to burn the grass in a 10-foot radius. But the smell got worse, and new rectangles of dead grass appeared each morning, like graves in a miniature cemetery. Our backyard was dying in patches, and my husband was the one killing it. Things got more suspicious one day. After his usual routine, he slipped back into bed, and a smell hit me before he even got under the covers. He reeked like a public bathroom, like sewage. When he turned toward me in his sleep, the moonlight hit his face. There was something dark smeared on his nose. I leaned closer and nearly gagged. It was shit. Actual feces on his face. My husband had been doing something with actual human waste. That's when I knew I had to follow him. I had to see exactly what the F my husband was doing with those carefully selected packages. The next night, I crept downstairs and watched from the kitchen window with a clear view. I don't know how else to say this without sounding completely insane, but what I saw was my husband carefully pulling dirty diapers from our trash, our daughter's diapers. He'd hold each one up to his flashlight, toss back the ones that were just wet, and keep searching until he found ones with solid waste. Then he'd peel them open like sacred artifacts and just smell them. Deep, long inhales with his eyes closed, his whole body relaxing with each breath. He'd stand there for 10-15 minutes, breathing in our baby's poop with this look of pure bliss on his face, the same expression he used to have when we were intimate. Between diapers, he'd make notes in that little notebook, rating them by quality. The best ones went into Ziploc bags, then into the ground. I watched him dig up a buried container, add tonight's collection, and carefully cover it again. My husband had turned our backyard into an underground archive of our daughter's shit. I'm at a loss as to what I should do now. I'm too scared to confront him, but I know I have to. The next morning, I sat at our kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee that I couldn't bring myself to drink. Marcus hummed Emma's favorite song while he spooned oatmeal into her mouth and wiped her chin with a wet cloth. His movements were so normal and gentle that my stomach twisted watching him touch her. I pushed back from the table and rushed to the powder room where I threw up until nothing was left. When I came back, Marcus pressed his palm against my forehead and said I looked pale, but his touch made my skin crawl so bad I had to step away. After he left for work, I called Emma's playgroup to say we were sick, and then opened my laptop in incognito mode. I typed unusual bathroom behaviors into the search bar and clicked through medical websites that described something called coprophilia. The clinical descriptions matched everything I'd seen Marcus do, including the collecting and the look on his face. Each article made me feel sicker until I had to close the laptop and clear my browser history 3 times. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca asking if I wanted to grab lunch at our usual place. I started typing everything in the message box, but deleted it all and just wrote back yes. At noon, I pushed Emma's stroller into the cafe where Rebecca was already waiting with her iced tea. She took one look at my face and grabbed my hand across the table. I leaned forward and whispered everything I'd seen in a rushed stream of words while Emma napped in her stroller. Rebecca's face went from confused to shocked to completely horrified as I described the diapers and the burying and the smell on his face. She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table, telling me I needed to record him tonight to get proof. That evening, I made a big show of taking a sleeping pill in front of Marcus and going to bed at 9. At exactly 1:45 a.m., I slipped his phone from the nightstand and crept into Emma's room where I positioned myself behind the door. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he'd hear it when his footsteps came down the hall at 2 a.m. sharp. Through the phone screen, I watched him push open Emma's door and stand over her crib for 5 full minutes just staring down at her. He reached into the crib and adjusted her diaper even though she was sleeping fine and his fingers stayed there too long. Then he went to the diaper pail and pulled out a used one that he held up to his face. He took deep breaths with his eyes closed and whispered something that sounded like Daddy's special girl to the actual diaper. I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. He carried the diaper downstairs and I followed him on the recording as he went through his whole routine. The latex gloves snapped on and he sorted through more diapers with his flashlight between his teeth. But tonight he did something new by pulling out a tablet I'd never seen before and taking photos of each diaper. He typed notes under each photo and saved them in dated folders before putting the diapers in Ziploc bags. The tablet went into a locked drawer in his workshop that I didn't even know existed. After he buried tonight's collection in the backyard, he came back upstairs at at 4:30 a.m. like always. I lay completely still next to him, feeling his warm breath on my neck and wondering what he was thinking. Every time Emma cried during the rest of the night, he jumped up immediately to check on her. I counted his breaths and planned what to do next while sleep stayed impossible. In the morning, I told Marcus I needed to run errands and took Emma straight to Rebecca's house. She had already researched everything and handed me a color-coded folder with lawyers and therapists and phone numbers. The first lawyer appointment she could get was in 3 days, which meant 3 more nights of this. I started a new routine where I kept Emma out of the house for most of the day. I changed her diapers only in public bathrooms and threw them away in outside trash cans immediately. That evening, Marcus noticed the empty diaper pail when he got home from work. He asked if I'd already changed the trash, and there was something sharp in his voice I'd never heard before. I told him yes, I'd taken it out earlier, and watched his jaw tighten as he walked to the kitchen window and stared at our backyard for a full minute without moving. That night at 2 a.m., I pretended to sleep while he slipped out of bed, and I watched through our bedroom window as he went straight to our trash bins and found them empty. He stood there for a moment, then walked over to Tom Sullivan's bins next door and started going through them with his flashlight. He came back empty-handed, and I heard him go into Emma's room, then back out to check more neighbors' trash, then back to Emma's room again. The third time he went to her room, I crept down the hallway and watched through the crack in her door as he stood over her crib for almost 20 minutes, his hand hovering over her sleeping body before pulling back. The next morning, while Marcus was at work, Tom knocked on our door and asked if everything was okay because my husband had been in his garbage at 2 a.m. I made up some story about Emma throwing her favorite toy away by accident, but Tom said Marcus had been in his trash 3 times that week and he'd been watching him for weeks now. Something feels off about how the husband checks the neighbors' windows before going through their trash. Why would someone be that careful about being seen if they're just dealing with pest control like he claims? I finally met with a lawyer 3 days later, a woman named Patricia Vance who listened to my story with a blank face until I showed her the video I'd taken of Marcus in our backyard. She told me we needed to file for emergency custody immediately because this was psychological abuse even if he hadn't touched Emma directly, but we'd need more evidence of his pattern of behavior. Patricia filed paperwork for a protective order, but said the court date wouldn't be for 2 weeks, and in the meantime, I should document everything while acting normal. I bought a nanny cam and hid it in Emma's stuffed elephant, and the first night's footage showed Marcus spending 40 minutes just watching her sleep while touching her hair over and over. Rebecca came over the next day while Marcus was at work and convinced me to search his workshop in the basement. The locked drawer had a tablet, but also zip drives with dates going back 2 years before Emma was even born. I opened one on my laptop and found hundreds of photos of dirty diapers from public changing tables and playground trash cans, all labeled with locations and the ages of the kids they came from. Dr. Hoffman, the psychiatrist Patricia recommended, looked at my evidence during an emergency meeting and explained that this was escalating behavior, that the progression from collecting in public to focusing on his own child meant he needed immediate intervention. He agreed to testify if needed, but warned me Marcus might become dangerous if confronted directly. That weekend, we had to go to Marcus's company picnic, and I watched him play the perfect father while his coworkers said what a natural he was with Emma. His boss pulled me aside and mentioned Marcus had been making mistakes on projects lately and asked if everything was okay at home, so I just smiled and blamed it on sleepless nights with a toddler. That night, I woke up at 1 a.m. to find Marcus already gone from bed, an hour earlier than usual. Emma's room was empty, and I found them in the basement where Marcus was changing her diaper on his workshop bench, even though she was completely clean. Emma was awake and crying, reaching for me, and Marcus said she'd had a nightmare, but his hands were shaking as he fastened the fresh diaper, and the clean one was already sealed in a Ziploc bag. I grabbed Emma and drove straight to Rebecca's house, texting Marcus that Emma had a fever and Rebecca was helping since she was off work. His texts started coming every few minutes asking for photos, demanding her temperature, saying he was coming over. Rebecca had to physically block her door at 3 a.m. when Marcus showed up pounding on it and demanding to see his daughter while she kept telling him Emma was sleeping and he needed to go home. The next morning, Marcus's mother Diane called me 15 times before I finally answered, and she immediately started yelling about what I was doing to her son because he'd called her crying about me keeping Emma from him. When I tried to hint at what I discovered, she went quiet for a long moment before saying I didn't understand, that Marcus had always been special and different, but he'd never hurt Emma, and the way she said different sounded like she'd said it many times before. After hanging up with Diane, I immediately packed Emma's diaper bag and drove straight to the police station where Detective Morales from the Family Crimes Unit was waiting for me. She sat across from me in a small interview room reviewing everything I'd recorded on my phone, including the videos of Marcus in our backyard. Her face stayed professional, but I saw her jaw tighten when she watched him smell the diapers. She explained that while this was deeply disturbing, it wasn't technically illegal yet, since he hadn't touched Emma inappropriately or created any images of her. But the pattern worried her enough to open a monitoring file, and she gave me her direct number saying to call immediately if anything escalated. A week later, Marcus got served with the protective order paperwork at his mother's house where he'd been staying. He texted me a photo of the papers with just, "How could you?" And within hours, his Facebook was full of posts about how I was keeping him from his daughter because of postpartum anxiety. Friends started messaging me asking if I was okay and suggesting I get help for my mental health issues. Marcus had turned the whole thing around, making me look crazy. 3 days later, while I was loading Emma into her car seat, Tom Sullivan from next door walked over holding something. He handed me a USB drive and told me he had 6 months of security footage showing Marcus in our trash every single night. He'd thought Marcus was having an affair and meeting someone, so he kept recording, but now he knew better. The court hearing came 2 weeks later, and Marcus showed up with Diane and a lawyer looking tired, but wearing his best suit. When my lawyer Patricia showed the judge the video evidence, including the part where Marcus whispered to the diaper, the judge's expression changed completely. The judge asked Marcus if he needed psychological evaluation, and his lawyer quickly agreed to voluntary counseling in exchange for supervised visitation rights. After court, I sat in my car watching Marcus and Diane arguing in the parking lot. I could see her mouth forming the words, "I told you to be careful," while she gestured angrily at him. Marcus looked broken, but when he glanced at my car, his face changed to something else entirely. Pure cold rage that he'd been caught. The supervised visitation center was in a converted house with cameras everywhere and staff trained specifically in child protection. Marcus's first 2-hour visit was scheduled for the following week, and I watched through the one-way glass as he played normally with Emma at first. But when she needed a diaper change, his whole body went rigid and he insisted insisted on doing it himself. The supervisor had to physically step between him and Emma, citing the court order that prohibited him from any diaper changes. That same night, my phone buzzed with a security alert showing motion in our backyard at 2 in the morning. Marcus was there with a shovel frantically digging up his buried collection, even though the protective order said he couldn't come near our property. I called Detective Morales while recording him through the window, but by the time the police arrived, he was gone, leaving huge holes all over our yard. The officers found way more than just Emma's diapers in those holes. There were Ziploc bags labeled with dates going back years with names of other children from his old neighborhood written on them. Dr. Hoffman met with Marcus as part of the court-ordered evaluation and called me afterward with his assessment. He said Marcus had severe paraphilic disorder with obsessive-compulsive features, and his fixation had narrowed specifically to Emma, which meant she needed protection. This wasn't something basic counseling would fix, and Marcus needed intensive inpatient treatment immediately. Rebecca came over the next day to help me change all the locks while Emma napped in her playpen. We found Marcus's hidden spare key in the garage and then discovered a tablet duct-taped inside the water heater closet. The tablet had dozens of videos, but not of Emma, thank God. They were all of Marcus talking to the camera, describing his collection in detail, including the smell and texture of different samples. Rebecca barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. 2 weeks later, during Marcus's second supervised visit, he brought Emma a new stuffed bear that the supervisor inspected carefully. She found a tiny camera sewn inside the bear's eye, and Marcus claimed he just wanted to see his daughter during the week when he couldn't visit. The visitation center banned him immediately pending review, and his lawyer dropped him as a client that same afternoon. 3 days after that disaster, Diane showed up at my door around noon while Emma was napping, and before I could even process who it was, she pushed right past me into my living room. Her face was red and her hands were shaking as she turned on me, and I could smell wine on her breath even though it was barely lunchtime. She started going off about how I was destroying her son, how he'd always had his quirks but was harmless, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. She mentioned that when Marcus was little, it was just a phase, but she caught herself mid-sentence when she noticed I had my phone out recording everything. I asked her what she meant about when he was little, but she just grabbed her purse and left without another word. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd almost said, so I spent hours scrubbing Emma's room from top to bottom, washing every single thing twice, and even replacing her crib mattress and all her stuffed animals. Emma watched me from her playpen the whole time, confused about why I was taking apart her entire room, and when bedtime came, she absolutely refused to sleep in her crib. She screamed every time I tried to put her down, clinging to my shirt like she knew something was wrong, and we ended up sleeping on the couch together with her tiny hand gripping my shirt all night. The next morning, my lawyer Patricia called with news that made everything worse. Marcus had gotten himself a new lawyer, some guy known for nasty custody battles, and they'd filed for joint custody claiming I was keeping Emma from him unfairly. Patricia said he was painting me as mentally unstable and claiming I was making up evidence, and we had our first hearing in 3 weeks. She recommended I hire a private investigator right away, someone who could dig into Marcus's background properly, so I called the guy she suggested that same afternoon. Within just a few days, the investigator called me with his first findings. Marcus had been active in online support groups, but not the kind you'd hope for. Marcus really thought he could hide a camera in a teddy bear's eye? That's some cartoon villain logic right there. Nothing says trustworthy parent like turning toys into spy gear during court-ordered visits. These were groups for parents claiming to be falsely accused of abuse, and he'd been sharing selective details about our situation to get sympathy and advice on fighting custody battles. The investigator sent me screenshots where other users were coaching Marcus on documenting my erratic behavior and building a case against me. A week later, I took Emma grocery shopping, trying to maintain some normal routine, when she pointed at a random man near the produce section and said her first word clearly. "Dada," she said, reaching toward this complete stranger who smiled kindly at us. I abandoned our cart right there in the middle of the store and carried Emma out while she screamed in confusion, not understanding why we were leaving so suddenly. In the parking lot, I called Dr. Hoffman with shaking hands, and he gently reminded me that Emma needed stability and routine, not my anxiety. But how could I explain that every man I saw now looked like a potential threat? The private investigator called again 2 days later with something huge. He'd uncovered that Marcus Miller wasn't even my husband's real name. He'd legally changed it 5 years ago after an incident at his previous job where a coworker had accused him of stealing used diapers from the company daycare. The case was dropped when Marcus agreed to resign quietly, but the investigator tracked down that coworker who was willing to provide a written statement about what she'd witnessed. Meanwhile, the court had subpoenaed Marcus's psychological evaluation results from Dr. Hoffman, and the report was absolutely damning. It stated Marcus was exhibiting escalating paraphilic behavior with high risk of progression to contact offenses and recommended no unsupervised contact with minor children. Marcus's new lawyer tried to file a motion to suppress the report claiming bias, but the judge allowed it into evidence anyway. I had to return to work part-time just to afford the mounting legal fees, which meant finding daycare for Emma. The director of the new place I chose understood our situation after I explained everything, and she assigned Emma one specific teacher who would personally handle all diaper changes. I started bringing my own diapers that I discreetly numbered with a Sharpie, and every evening I'd count them to make sure they all came back. Tom from next door gave a deposition about everything he'd witnessed over the months, and his security footage was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. The video spanned 6 months and showed Marcus checking multiple neighbors' trash cans, always focusing on houses with young children. One video even captured him taking a diaper from a stroller that was parked outside the community center during a mommy and me class while the mom was inside. About a month after all this started, Marcus's online activity escalated to a whole new level. He created fake social media profiles and started contacting my friends directly, spreading rumors about my mental health and claiming I was having delusions. 3 different moms from my playgroup suddenly canceled our weekly meetups, and when I finally got one of them to talk to me, she admitted Marcus had messaged her claiming I was unstable and that Emma wasn't safe with me. The worst part was I started second-guessing myself every single day. I'd walk through our house checking every window lock twice, then check them again an hour later. Outside, I couldn't stop staring at those dead patches in our backyard where Marcus had buried his collection. The grass still wouldn't grow there no matter how much seed I put down. Emma would toddle around the yard pointing at butterflies, and I'd follow right behind her, never letting her get more than 3 feet away. She'd reach up and pat my cheek with her little hand, asking if Mama was sad, and I'd force a smile while my stomach twisted into knots. 3 weeks weeks later, the custody hearing finally started, and I almost threw up when I saw Marcus walk into that courtroom. He'd gotten a haircut and bought a new gray suit that made him look like some kind of businessman instead of the man I'd caught sniffing our daughter's dirty diapers. His lawyer had lined up a bunch of people from his work to say what a great guy he was. The manager from his office stood up there talking about how Marcus never missed a day and always volunteered for the company charity drives. Then came people from his church saying he taught Sunday school and helped with the nursery program, which made my skin crawl, knowing what I knew. Our lawyer Patricia tried to present the evidence, but Marcus's lawyer kept objecting to everything, calling it circumstantial and saying we were misinterpreting normal parental behavior. When Marcus took a stand, he actually admitted to collecting the diapers, but said he was just trying to preserve memories of Emma's babyhood because she was growing up so fast. He started crying right there in front of everyone, saying he just loved his daughter too much and maybe went a little overboard. I watched two of the jurors actually lean forward with sympathy on their faces, and Patricia grabbed my hand under the table, squeezing it hard. The next day, they brought in Marcus's former co-worker from his old job on a video screen since she lived in another state now. She told them about finding him in the company daycare after everyone had gone home with a plastic bag full of used diapers in his desk drawer. She said when she confronted him, he'd grabbed her wrist so hard it left bruises and threatened to ruin her career if she told anyone. Marcus's lawyer tried to make her look crazy, asking why she didn't file a police report, but she stayed calm and kept repeating that she knew what she saw, and that's why she made sure he got transferred out of that office. During the lunch break, I was getting water from the fountain when Diane cornered me in the hallway. She grabbed both my arms and started begging me to let her get Marcus help at some special facility in Switzerland that dealt with these kinds of problems. She kept saying Emma needed her father and she could keep him under control like she had for years, which made me wonder what else she'd been hiding about her son. When I tried to pull away, she dug her fingers in harder until a security guard had to come over and separate us. 2 weeks into the trial, Dr. Hoffman finally got to testify about what he called paraphilic disorders. He put up all these charts showing how people with these conditions get worse over time without treatment. He explained how they start with objects like diapers, but often progress to wanting direct contact with children. Marcus's lawyer kept trying to say, Doctor. Hoffman wasn't qualified, but the doctor calmly listed his 40 years of experience and all the cases he'd worked on. He looked right at the jury and said Marcus showed classic escalation patterns, and without serious intervention, he'd likely move on to touching actual children. That same week, Emma started waking up screaming every single night. She'd thrash around yelling no over and over and wouldn't let me change her diaper without having a complete meltdown. The pediatrician said even though she couldn't remember specific events, her body was showing trauma responses. I had to sing the entire time I changed her, playing the same songs on repeat just to keep her from panicking. Then Patricia's private investigator dropped a bomb on us. He'd been following Marcus and caught him going to different playgrounds around the city, sitting on benches near where the toddlers played. He had a camera and was taking pictures until parents complained, and he'd leave before cops showed up. One mom had actually recorded him on her phone, and you could clearly see him zooming in on kids in diapers. Patricia said this video would be crucial evidence showing Marcus was already escalating his behavior. Marcus's lawyer tried a new strategy, saying I was coaching Emma to be afraid of her father. He demanded the court appoint someone to evaluate if I was manipulating my daughter, so they brought in this child advocate named Mrs. Williams, who spent a whole week following Emma around. She watched Emma at daycare and at home and took notes on how she reacted to different people. She saw Emma freeze up whenever male caregivers tried to change her, and noted how she'd start shaking during diaper changes, even with me. I ran into Marcus at the pharmacy while picking up the anxiety medication they'd prescribed for Emma, because yes, my 18-month-old baby now needed anti-anxiety meds just to get through diaper changes. He was in the adult diaper aisle holding a package, and when he saw me looking, he smiled and said loudly enough for other customers to hear that they were for his mother. But the way he stared at me while holding that package made me want to run out of that store and never stop running. 2 weeks later, the child advocate's report came in, and it was worse than anyone expected. Emma had started wetting herself during the day, even though she'd been dry for months. She'd scream when anyone tried to change her diaper and would hide behind furniture when Marcus's name was mentioned. The advocate spent 3 hours with her and watched Emma have a full panic attack when shown a photo of Marcus. She recommended no unsupervised contact until Emma could talk about what happened, which meant years, not months. Marcus lost it when he heard this at the next hearing. He stood up and fired his lawyer right there in front of everyone. The judge asked him 3 times if he was sure about representing himself, but Marcus kept saying he knew his rights as a father. His opening statement to the jury was a mess. He rambled for 20 minutes about how the system was against fathers and how I'd poisoned everyone against him. He never once addressed the actual evidence like the photos or the basement incident or the diapers. The jury looked confused and uncomfortable as he paced back and forth, waving his arms. Rebecca took Emma to her house that weekend so I could prepare for my testimony without distractions. Why would Marcus choose to represent himself when he's facing such serious charges? I'm curious what made him think firing his lawyer would help his case when he clearly needs legal expertise right now. The house felt wrong without Emma's toys scattered around and her babbling from her room. I sat on her bedroom floor holding her favorite stuffed bear and finally let myself cry. Not the angry tears or scared tears I'd been crying for months, but exhausted tears. Tomorrow I had to tell 12 strangers about finding my husband with our baby in that basement. On the stand, I kept my hands folded to stop them from shaking. I described walking down those basement stairs and seeing Marcus with Emma on that mattress. He jumped up and yelled that I was lying. The judge warned him to sit down. When I described the smell on his face that night in bed, 2 jurors looked like they might throw up. Marcus shouted that I was making it all up, and the bailiffs had to hold him back from approaching the witness stand. 3 days later, Patricia gave her closing argument, and it was brutal. She laid out every piece of evidence in order, starting with the public bathroom diapers and ending with the basement. She showed the jury Marcus's tablet with hundreds of photos of Emma during diaper changes. She held up the Ziploc bags full of used diapers they'd found buried in our yard. This wasn't about preserving memories, she told them, but about a dangerous obsession with a child who couldn't protect herself. While we waited for the verdict, I stayed at Rebecca's house because I couldn't be in that house alone. Emma seemed calmer there and started playing with her blocks again for the first time in weeks. She was saying new words every day like dog and juice, and then one morning she said no Marcus when she saw his photo on my phone. The way she said it made my blood run cold because how much did she actually remember from those nights? The jury came back after 6 hours of deliberation. Guilty on child endangerment, guilty on stalking, guilty on violation of the protective order. Marcus collapsed in his chair while his mother Diane screamed that we'd destroyed an innocent man. The judge ordered Marcus taken into custody right away for sentencing in 2 weeks. Detective Morales called me that night with more news. They'd searched Marcus's office computer and found a hidden hard drive with thousands more images. Not just Emma, but kids from 3 different states where Marcus had traveled for work conferences. The FBI was taking over that part of the investigation because it crossed state lines. That first night after the verdict, I couldn't sleep even knowing Marcus was locked up. Every car door slamming made me jump and check the locks. Every branch hitting the window sent me running to Emma's room. Rebecca found me at 3 in the morning standing outside Emma's door with a baseball bat. She said it was over, but we both knew it wasn't really over. At sentencing 2 weeks later, Marcus gave a victim impact statement that made everyone in the courtroom uncomfortable. He didn't apologize or show any regret for what he'd done. Instead, he talked about being misunderstood and persecuted for loving his daughter too much. He stared at me the whole time with that same cold rage from the parking lot months ago. The judge sentenced him to 5 years with mandatory psychiatric treatment and lifetime registration as a sex offender. 2 weeks later, Diane showed up at my door with legal papers, and that same lawyer Marcus had tried to use before everything fell apart. She was filing for grandparent rights, claiming I was keeping Emma from her family out of spite. The papers shook in my hands as I read through her accusations that I was an unfit mother who was alienating her granddaughter. Patricia called me that afternoon after reviewing everything and told me not to worry too much since Marcus's conviction basically destroyed any chance Diane had, but the case could still drag on for months. I started seeing Dr. Hoffman twice a week while Emma played with locks in his office, stacking them up and knocking them down over and over. He explained that my constant checking of locks and windows and jumping at every sound was normal after what I'd discovered. The FBI agent called during one of these sessions to tell me they'd found Marcus's online activity under the username Daddy Daycare, going back years before Emma was even born. They'd connected him to a whole network of people sharing content and needed my testimony for federal charges that could add another 10 to 15 years to his sentence. I threw up after that call, right there in Dr. Hoffman's trash can while Emma kept playing with her blocks. Her second birthday was coming up fast, and Rebecca convinced me we needed to celebrate even though I wanted to hide. We ended up at a small indoor play place with just 5 other kids from her daycare. No photos allowed, every parent vetted by me personally. Emma hadn't laughed in months, but when she saw that Elmo cake, her whole face lit up and she giggled so hard she got hiccups. The federal trial started 3 weeks later, and Marcus's lawyer dropped a bomb that made the whole courtroom go silent. Marcus had been abused when he was 4 years old by Diane's boyfriend, and she knew about it but stayed with the man for 3 more years. The prosecutor had photos from child services dated back to 1987, showing bruises on little Marcus, while Diane stood there insisting he'd fallen off his bike. Diane broke down sobbing in court, screaming that she'd failed him twice, first as a child and now as a mother. The private investigator Patricia hired found something that made everything else pale in comparison. Hair follicle tests from samples I'd saved from my hairbrush showed traces of zolpidem in my system going back a full year. Every night Marcus made me chamomile tea before bed, every single night for the past year, and I'd sleep so deeply I never heard him get up with Emma. The FBI tested the tea bags in our kitchen and found needle marks where he'd been injecting liquid sleeping medication. He'd been drugging me systematically so he could have uninterrupted time with our daughter. Tom knocked on my door the day before he moved out, unable to look me in the eye as he told me something he'd kept quiet about. The night before Marcus got arrested, Tom saw him in our backyard around midnight burying something near the garden shed. Police dug it up and found a time capsule with Emma's hospital bracelet, her first haircut in a tiny envelope, and a USB drive full of videos from when she was a newborn. Normal parent keepsakes turned into something sick by the context of everything else. Marcus got convicted on federal charges and sentenced to an additional 12 years, making his total sentence 17 years. During transport to federal prison, he tried to hang himself with his shirt, but the guards found him in time and put him on suicide watch. Diane posted on Facebook calling me the woman who destroyed her family and got over 1,000 shares before it got taken down. She showed up at Emma's daycare the next day screaming my name until the police arrested her for harassment and trespassing. I put the house on the market immediately, and during the pre-sale inspection, the contractors called me down to the basement. They'd found cameras in the walls, 16 total according to the FBI tech team who came to remove them. Marcus had been watching everything for years, saw me find his collection, heard my calls to Rebecca, watched me plan everything while I thought I was being so careful. The house sold below asking price, but I didn't care because Emma and I were already settling into a 2-bedroom rental across town. She stopped asking about Dada after the first week, and her nightmares went from every night to maybe once a week. The pediatrician said she was adjusting remarkably well, and that kids are resilient at this age, but we both knew she'd need therapy when she was older to process why her father wasn't around. 6 months passed in a blur of court dates and paperwork until the judge finally signed the divorce decree while Marcus sat in his orange jumpsuit at the defendant's table. He didn't fight any of it, just signed where his lawyer pointed while keeping his eyes down the whole time. The judge gave me everything: full custody, sole decision rights, and terminated Marcus's parental rights based on his conviction for possession of child exploitation material. Patricia, my lawyer, squeezed my shoulder outside the courthouse and told me I'd saved my daughter, but I threw up in the parking garage bathroom right after. I started going to a support group that met Tuesday nights in a church basement downtown where other parents sat in metal folding chairs holding styrofoam cups of terrible coffee. The facilitator had been through it herself 20 years ago with her uncle, and she kept reminding us that predators are master manipulators who spend years perfecting their disguises. 3 weeks into the meetings, a thick envelope arrived from the state prison with Marcus's inmate number in the corner. I drove straight to the police station and handed it to Detective Morales, who opened it with gloves on while I waited in the hallway. She came out 10 minutes later with her jaw tight and told me it contained graphic fantasies about Emma that violated his no-contact order and would add another year to his sentence. The next month, Rebecca called me at work to say Diane had died of a heart attack, and the obituary in the paper called Marcus her beloved son, who was wrongly imprisoned by a vindictive ex-wife. Rebecca went to the funeral while I stayed home with Emma, and she texted me that only 3 people showed up, including Diane's sister, who cornered Rebecca afterward. The sister admitted the whole family knew Marcus had problems since he was 12, but they thought getting married and having kids would fix him somehow. Emma started preschool in September, and I spent 2 weeks beforehand checking every staff member's background, and and making sure there were cameras in every room, including the bathrooms. The director knew our whole situation because I'd made her read the court documents, and she promised me they had strict protocols about who could change diapers and how. Patricia's not pulling punches with those closing arguments. Ziploc bags of buried diapers really drives home that this wasn't scrapbooking gone wrong. Marcus's courtroom meltdown probably helped the jury more than any defense lawyer could have hurt him. Still, I sat in my car in the parking lot for the entire first week, watching the door and checking my phone every 5 minutes for the security app alerts. The FBI called in October asking me to testify against 7 men from Marcus's online network who'd been sharing the same kind of content across multiple states. I flew to DC and sat in a windowless room for 3 days looking at evidence and answering questions about dates and times while prosecutors built their cases. One of the men had detailed plans to kidnap a toddler from a park, and they showed me his notebook with addresses and schedules he'd been tracking for months. All 7 got convicted, and the lead prosecutor shook my hand afterward, but I felt empty and exhausted, like I'd run a marathon with no finish line. Emma made her first friend at preschool, a little girl named Sophia, whose mom invited us over for a playdate in November. I told Sophia's mom everything up front because I couldn't handle secrets anymore, and she just hugged me and said I was the strongest person she knew. I watched Emma share her toys and giggle with Sophia, and for the first time in months, she seemed like a normal kid instead of a victim. Then Marcus's old co-worker Linda called me out of the blue, saying 3 more families had come forward after his arrest with stories about missing diapers at company picnics and weird behavior around their kids. The company was getting sued for ignoring complaints, and she apologized for not pushing harder when she'd reported him years ago for something she'd seen, but got paid to sign an NDA instead. A year after the arrest, Dr. Hoffman reviewed Emma's progress charts and said her anxiety had dropped significantly, and she wasn't showing trauma responses during diaper changes anymore. He recommended dropping therapy to once a month since she was hitting all her milestones, and probably wouldn't remember much as she got older, which felt like a small miracle. Rebecca set me up with her coworker's brother in December, and I went to dinner at an Italian place downtown, where I spent the whole time studying how he held his fork and whether his laugh sounded genuine. He was nice enough and asked about Emma, but I kept looking for red flags in every comment about kids or families. When he texted about a second date, I said I wasn't ready, which was true, but also I wondered if I'd ever trust anyone again after missing what Marcus was doing right in front of me. Saturday mornings became our thing, me and Emma making pancakes shaped like animals while music played from my phone. She'd stand on her little step stool stirring batter with both hands gripping the wooden spoon, flour dusting her nose and cheeks. We went to the library every Tuesday where she'd pull books off shelves faster than I could put them back, settling on the same 3 stories about bears every single week. Thursday afternoons we'd blast Disney songs and jump around the living room until we both collapsed on the couch, breathing hard and laughing. Most nights I'd stand in her doorway watching her sleep, her small body curled around that stuffed elephant she couldn't sleep without, and I'd wonder what dreams filled her head now. A documentary producer called one afternoon while Emma napped, her voice professional but gentle as she explained how our story could help other families recognize warning signs. I gave her detective's contact info and hung up, not ready to relive it all for cameras. 3 weeks later, detective called with news that made me sit down hard on the kitchen floor. Marcus had been attacked in the prison shower by another inmate who'd found out what he'd done to kids. The guy used a sharpened toothbrush to stab him 17 times in the stomach and chest before guards pulled him off. Marcus survived after emergency surgery and 6 pints of blood, his lawyer requesting medical furlough that got denied within hours. I felt nothing when I heard it. Not relief or sadness or anger, just this empty space where feelings about him used to live. Emma asked about her daddy one morning at breakfast when her friend at preschool had talked about going fishing with his dad. "Where's my daddy?" she asked, syrup dripping from her fork. I told her daddy was sick and couldn't be with us, and she just nodded and went back to her pancakes like it was any other fact about the world. The house finally sold after dropping the price by almost half, everyone in town knowing it as the place where that guy buried stuff in the backyard. I donated everything we'd shared, keeping only Emma's things and my clothes. The retired couple buying it promised to rip out the entire backyard, lay fresh sod, plant new trees, make it clean again. Rebecca drove us to the ocean 6 months later, Emma seeing waves for the first time and screaming when the cold water touched her toes. Then she was running back and forth, chasing the foam, her laughter carrying over the sound of the surf while I realized I hadn't checked exits or watched for danger once since we'd arrived. Detective called with a final update while I was folding Emma's laundry, telling me Marcus had taken a plea deal for 22 more years after giving up names in some federal case about online networks. With good behavior, he'd get out when Emma turned 24, old enough to protect herself, old enough to decide if she ever wanted contact. The financial planner's office smelled like leather and coffee as I signed papers setting up Emma's college fund, therapy fund, emergency fund, with money from the divorce and house sale. "Will the father contribute?" she asked without looking up from her computer. "No," I said, and she just nodded and kept typing. Emma's preschool graduation had her in a tiny purple cap and gown, singing songs about butterflies and rainbows with 12 other 4-year-olds while parents filmed everything on their phones. She waved at me from the little stage, this huge smile showing her missing front tooth, and Rebecca recorded it all while I cried behind my sunglasses, knowing this was the first big moment Marcus had completely missed. The legal document arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday, the paper declaring Marcus's parental rights permanently terminated, no possibility of reversal even after his release. I held that single page feeling its weight, knowing someday Emma would need to see it, need to know I'd done everything possible to keep her safe from him. 3 months passed before Dr. Hoffman scheduled Emma's last checkup at his office downtown. He watched her play with blocks for 20 minutes while taking notes on his clipboard. Emma stacked them high, knocked them down, laughed like any normal kid would. He pulled me aside while his assistant kept Emma busy with coloring books. His report showed all these positive words circled on the evaluation form: minimal lasting trauma, excellent prognosis, remarkable resilience. He squeezed my shoulder and told me kids who get help early like Emma usually turn out just fine. The new therapist he was transferring her to specialized in maintenance care, just monthly check-ins to make sure she stayed on track. That same week, Rebecca dragged me to my last support group meeting at the community center. A new woman sat in the circle, her hands shaking around her coffee cup. Her husband got arrested 2 days ago for the same thing as Marcus. She looked at me with that same shock I remembered feeling, like the world had turned upside down. I told her it gets better, not easier, but better, that she'd survive this, and so would her kids. She cried cried through the whole meeting but texted me later saying my words helped. September came and Emma started kindergarten at Willowbrook Elementary across town, where nobody knew our story. She made 3 friends the first day, came home talking nonstop about finger painting and story time. Her teacher, Mrs. Chen, pulled me aside during October conferences to say Emma was one of the most well-adjusted kids in class. She showed me Emma's artwork covering the classroom walls, all bright colors and happy faces. For the first time, I actually believed we might be okay. The prison system sent a letter in November saying Marcus got moved to their psychiatric unit for some intensive treatment program. The director included all these statistics about success rates and rehabilitation outcomes. I threw it straight in the trash without opening the rest. His recovery wasn't my problem anymore. Emma's continued healing was all that mattered to me. Rebecca started coming over every Wednesday for spaghetti dinner, becoming the stable aunt figure Emma needed. Emma would tell us about her friends, her favorite books, how she wanted to be a vet when she grew up. At 5 years old, she was confident and silly. Nothing like the scared toddler from 3 years ago. Spring brought new changes when I met David at a school fundraiser. He was raising his son alone after his wife died from cancer 2 years back. On our third date, I told him everything about Marcus and what happened. He just nodded and said we all have our stuff to deal with. Emma liked him because he made good grilled cheese sandwiches and taught her card tricks. We took things slow and careful, but it felt like maybe I could have something normal again. The documentary about our case aired in May, without us participating directly. 3 different families reached out afterwards saying it helped them recognize warning signs in their own homes. Detective Morales won some big award for her work on our case and sent Emma a junior detective badge in the mail. Emma wore it everywhere for weeks, telling everyone she was going to catch bad guys. Around Emma's 6th birthday, she started asking harder questions about her dad. Her therapist helped me practice age-appropriate answers. I told Emma that daddy did things that weren't safe, so he had to go away to get help. She thought about it for maybe 10 seconds, then asked if we were safe now. Marcus taking a plea for 22 more years after giving up names makes me wonder how deep this network really went, and what else he knew that made prosecutors offer that deal. When I said yes, she went right back to playing with her dolls, satisfied with a simple truth. Rebecca texted me on the 3rd anniversary of that night in the backyard. 3 years, look how far you've come. I watched Emma doing homework at our kitchen table in our new house, her tongue sticking out while she concentrated on spelling words. The woman who found her husband in the backyard felt like someone from another life entirely. Tonight, Emma asked me to read her favorite bedtime story about a brave princess who saves herself from the dragon. After she fell asleep, I stood in her doorway just watching her breathe steady and calm. Tomorrow, she has a spelling test, a play date with her friend Mia, swimming lessons at the Y, normal kid stuff that once seemed impossible when I was drowning in court dates and therapy appointments. Her room was decorated with butterflies and rainbows, not a single sign of the darkness we survived. She's safe now, really safe, and she's going to be okay. We both are. Well, folks, that's our time together, all wrapped up with a neat little bow. Appreciate you letting me drop in with my clever quips. Always a pleasure. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.